Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS Inform. Well, it's Friday, and joining us in the studio is State Senator Mark Messmer. Senator, welcome to the show. We always appreciate you taking time on Fridays to talk about what's happened in the legislation.
My pleasure. Always great to catch up with what's happened this week in the State House.
Well, one of the things that there has been some talk on is the bias bill, or the hatred bill, or
hate crimes, bias crimes.
Yeah, whatever.
Yep.
Okay, will you talk about that, please?
Sure, absolutely. So as we started into the session, we had a couple of Senate bills and there's a couple of House bills that we're dealing with. We're one of 5 states that don't have a bias crime provision in our statutes. A judge can, based on a 2003 Supreme Court ruling, I think it was called the Whitwer case, where a judge can, for whatever they want, if they see that a bias was part of, whether it was racial bias or religious bias, whatever bias they choose to apply, in the sentencing part of if you had committed battery or murder or whatever, I mean, you have to have some base felony committed. And in the sentencing, whether if it's a 5 to 10 year, recommend, either 5 years minimum, 10 maximum, or 10 minimum, 20 maximum, there's always a suggested sentencing range that's right in the middle of that. And then you can either from mitigating factors lower it, or aggravating factors raise it. And the bill that we had been working on that we had out of committee this week had a specific list of characteristics: age, religion, race, national origin, gender, sexual identity, a list of traits that included the typical reasons for bias, but it wasn't an exclusive list. It did allow a judge, for anything, to add for bias, including but not limited to that list. So, we wouldn't have to come back and continue. We could, in future years, address the list, add things to it or whatever. That bill came out of committee on Monday, and then Tuesday on the floor. And that bill and that list and that form, statewide, for the last 2 years we've polled it, has anywhere from 70 to 80% approval. In the 8th Congressional District, in our most recent poll, it was approved, I think, 83 to 14. It's broadly supported, but there was several of our members that just didn't feel comfortable with, moving the issue forward. So on the floor on Tuesday, that bill was basically stripped down to just say a judge can in the sentencing phase, add aggravators based on bias, which is what a judge can already do.
Okay. So
this bill basically does, nothing, but it was all the comfort level that at least the majority of folks in our caucus felt like they wanted to approve today. So the issue does continue to move. I mean, when it goes to the House, they could either approve it like we've got it, or they could put, the list of aggravating factors back in. But if we don't deal with it this year, we'll deal with it next year or the year after, because we're one of only 5 states, without a list of aggravators in the sentencing, phase of a crime.
Has this come up last year? Was this?
We passed it in 2016, almost exactly like we had come out of committee on Monday. I mean, almost it was the exact language, and it passed 34 to 13 in 2016. But the House didn't do anything with it.
So it stopped.
So
it got pushed off again, kind of like what's going to happen this year, probably. But
it's coming back.
Isn't that kind of typical of bills that
like
the Sunday sales was for a long time brought up and then defeated or changed, and
some
then
of those things
takes
take
years.
a while.
Okay. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's still in the process of how it could go.
Yeah, and it could before the end of session. It could end up back where we started, or we could, or nothing could happen.
Is there a bill similar to that in the House that could come over? Okay,
no.
So we'll just kind of have to see how that goes.
Yep, see what happens in the second half.
All right, what else is going on in legislation? You had some bills that were obviously well liked.
Well supported. I had 2 bills that received their final passage in the Senate this week. One was my physical therapist practice code update. Hasn't been updated in 62 years. That passed out of the House out of the Senate this week unanimously. So it's off to the House. And then my broadband corridors right-of-way bill passed unanimously earlier in the week as well. That's Senate Bill 460. So both of those are off to the House for future consideration. I had a couple of bills come out of committee this week that passed out of committee unanimously. One was the updates to our gaming statutes. Primary, result of that is going to be there's two boats on Lake Michigan in Gary. One could move within the city limits of Gary, and the other one could move to Terre Haute. That's the crux of the bill. There's a lot of other, minor pieces and nuances to that, but that's ultimately the result of that bill will be those provisions. It will allow the casinos within Indiana to have sports betting within their portfolios, like I think about 15 other states have it now. It was originally, up until a couple of years ago, strictly Nevada and New Jersey, but Supreme Court in May said the federal government can't prohibit any state from adopting betting on sports activities. So we're working on that. That's part of it. Was a standalone bill that Senator Ford had in public policy. We just merged it all into one bill. So we'll move forward with that. Then we had a couple other interesting bills hit the floor for final passage this week. One that I really liked, and not every county has a what they call a public safety local option income tax. You can have 1/4% as part of your local option income taxes if your county adopts it. That allows for police and fire protection to be paid for, out of that 0.25% LOIT. That could go to police or fire services within. Some of that money went to counties for sheriff's department. Some goes to cities for police department. But it left out township fire services were excluded. So Senate Bill 248 allows township fire services to go to the council and apply for some of that distribution of that fire and safety local option income tax. I think that's a very legitimate request and use of that. Township fire services provide 80% of the fire protection services across the state. So allowing them to be part of that seemed very reasonable to me.
Especially when you're in rural areas like we are.
Absolutely, right? Yep. Yeah. Most of District 48 is covered by township fire services. And then another interesting bill that had a lot of high-profile news this summer. There was a fertility clinic in Indianapolis, and there was a doctor who had used his own sperm to impregnate or to fertilize a bunch of women's, the eggs that they had brought in to be implanted, thinking they were picking from maybe their husband, or from people that they thought they were picking from a list of profiles within their data bank, but it was his own doctor's, and I think there were some civil penalties that he might be facing, but there was no criminal charges that applied. And so Senate Bill 174 passed unanimously yesterday that'll put some teeth into that in the future. Can't really rectify what happened with this guy, but at least it'll hopefully prevent it from happening in the future. I think we had 40 or 50 people that came to committee to testify that they found out that they were one of the people impacted. And you might have people that are half brothers and half sisters that had no idea.
Right.
Impacted by that, and just a lot of emotional trauma.
This is kind of the case that shows, we've talked about this before, how can there be so many bills, how can there be so many things to come up? You'd think after a while we would know what we're doing, but 20 years ago this wasn't an issue until it comes up. Exactly.
I mean, there's situations like this. I mean, another bill that passed this week that I supported. We had 2 years ago I was an author of a bill that set up or really kept local governments from prohibiting the use of what we call Airbnb, VRBO. Have the statutes in place to allow people to rent out use of their own homes, and some kind of parameters for that. But we did not deal with the taxation piece of it that year. We wanted to just set the policy. But one of the senators had a bill that if your county has innkeeper's tax, or if you rent your home out more than 15 days a year, that you need to collect sales tax and remit it to the state, and you need to, if your county has innkeeper's tax, you need to collect it and remit it to the county. left. I mean, and a lot of the online platforms can do that automatically for you. I mean, you know, some do, most do, or at least most of them have the capability of doing that. And if they don't, you know, or even if you don't use that platform, then you just need to collect it. And I mean, most full-time bed and breakfasts are doing that already, but this just clarifies that everybody needs to do it. And the people in the hotel business said it's really, for them, it's an issue of economic fairness. I mean, they're required to collect it. Yeah, exactly. So if you're in the rental business, you need to collect it and remit it.
And Airbnb is kind of a new thing.
Yeah,
that really hasn't been happening
5-10 years exactly.
Yeah.
So why do we need to create new laws? Well, a lot of times just deal with current, you know, changing technology and things that developed that didn't exist years ago. We did have another interesting bill come out of Appropriations Committee at the same time I had my hearing on the updates to the gaming statutes. One that would deal with allowing the CIB, which it's called the Capital Improvement Board in Marion County. They've got, you know, some sports development provisions within that allow them to make their contracts with the Colts and the Pacers. And the Pacers are in a contract renewal with the CIB in Marion County. So this bill would allow them to extend their contract with the Pacers for another 25 years and set up and that's just paid for out of, you know, hotel taxes in downtown Indianapolis that are part of that area. And as part of that, there's been an attempt for several years. I'll call it a minor league soccer team in Indianapolis now. Indy 11, I think, is the group, and they've really been pushing. There are some potentials yet for a few more major league soccer franchises that are still out there. This bill would also allow the CIB to set up one of their divisions under their sports development programming to go out and seek a contract with a major league soccer franchise, and then the stadium that it would take to hold that, and you know, the provisions that the private owners would have to help kick into that stadium construction. So, pretty exciting bill. I'd expect that to move through the House next week or through the Senate next week successfully, and then move it on to the House for the second half of the session. But two pretty big provisions that needed to be addressed, because the Pacers, if we couldn't sign another long-term contract with them, they could have potentially moved out of the city. But our professional sports, I think the analysis was they bring $3.3 billion into Indiana annually. So it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. All right, well then there's a lot of things that have happened, but none of this is law because now it goes to the House, and same with the House is coming.
Yep.
So when we mention that it's passing, we're passing from the Senate into the House.
Yeah, and there's always a fair chunk of the bills that the House passes or the Senate passes that don't make it the second half. So, but you have, to survive, to live another day, you got to get through at least the first half of the process. So on Monday we'll finish all amending of the remaining Senate bills, and I'm going to guess there's probably 50 bills that came out of committee this week that we'll finish. We did final passage on 38 bills this week. There's probably about 50 more to process on Monday, and there's we've got maybe a dozen bills that are available for third reading on Monday, and then Tuesday we'll finish passing the remaining Senate bills. Then Wednesday we'll meet and we'll assign all the House bills that were passed. On Monday, we'll assign those to committees on Wednesday, so then the following Monday we can come back and start meeting to work on House bills.
And then you'll eventually bring them to the floor.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Senator, thank you very much for coming.
You're very welcome. My
really
pleasure.
Appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to have State Senator representing District 48, Mark Messmer, coming in and joining us on Fridays here on 18 WJTS, kind of keep you up to date. Make sure that if you ever have a comment or you want to know a little bit more, contact your office, and you can do that online. Is probably the best way.
Online's the best way. Email senator.messmer@iga.in.gov is the easiest way to get a note to me.
All right, very good. Thank you very much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching WJTS. We are local people watching local people.